This presentation will review the National School Lunch Program, or known as the NSLP. It is a child nutrition program that's administered by the USDA. So there are several federal child nutrition programs. The USDA Food and Nutrition Services offers several child nutrition programs to address the nutritional needs of children and adults. What we'll focus on most in this presentation, as mentioned, is the National School Lunch Program, and within that program falls the After School Care Snack Program, along with the Seamless Summer Option, which is essentially a summer food program. They also administer the School Breakfast Program, Special Milk Program, the Child and Adult Care Food Program, which also contains the At-Risk After School Meals, and along with the traditional Summer Food Service Program. So how are these administered? The USDA FNS administers the program at the federal level. The FNS then communicates all regulations of those programs to each state agency. And the agency that oversees this will vary on each state or for each state. It often can fall between the Department of Education or the Department of Agriculture, and they will be the ones that will administer the programs at the state level. The state agency then administers programs through agreements with schools, and in the federal language, the schools are known as sponsors, or sometimes school food authorities, or SFAs. How these programs work. The SFAs, or schools, are reimbursed for properly operating the National School Lunch Program and Breakfast Program. This is done by correctly counting and claiming all meals served, and also serving meals that meet specific USDA standards. And this is the area that we will focus most on in this presentation. But it should be known that school children and families attending a school that participates in the NSLP will be asked to fill out a free and reduced application. This application will then determine their free or reduced or paid status. So in order to qualify for reduced or free meals, a family would need to fall within 130 to 185% of poverty line for reduced meals. What this actually means in reality is that a family of 4 would need to make between $4,625 a month to $3,251 a month, so within that range, they would qualify for reduced price meals. For a free meal, the family would need to make 130% or below the poverty line. In the same example, that same family of 4 would need to make $32.50 a month or below to qualify for these meals. Moving on to more of nutrition related and what schools need to provide for the National School Lunch Program, they have a requirement for meal patterns. This is essentially what they need to serve each day in order for it to be considered a reimbursable meal or a meal that they can get money for each serving. So schools are required on a daily basis to plan a minimum serving size for each of the 5 components listed below. On a weekly basis, schools are required to plan a minimum serving of grains, meat alternate, fruit, and a vegetable variety over the course of the week. So as you can see in the boxes below, these are each of the components required, and we will review them each individually and their requirements as far as serving and amounts per week and per day. So for serving sizes, schools must offer all 5 components in the correct serving size for each grade group served. So grades are broken up into different segments. You have K through 5, 6 through 8, K through 8, or 9 through 12. And these grade groups are really just dependent on how the school itself is broken up into. Is it an elementary? Is it a junior high? Is it a high school? And you'll notice as we go along that the serving sizes are going to be smaller in the K5, 6, 8 realm compared to when we get through 9 through 12. which is logical. A kindergartner most likely wouldn't eat as much or need as much of a serving of a particular food compared to, say, a 10th, 11th, or 12th grader. A serving size contributes to the component. So we measure fruit and vegetables in cups. We measure greens and meat alternates in ounce equivalents. And we measure milk in fluid ounce cups. So let's start with fruit. Fruit can be offered as a fresh, frozen without added sugar, canned in juice or light syrup, or 100% juice, or even dried. If they offer dried fruit, such as raisins, dried fruit credits as double the volume served. So say I serve 1/4 a cup of raisins, it would credit as 1/2 cup of fruit. Schools are not allowed to serve more than half of the fruit offerings from juice, and they must serve a minimum serving of 1/8 of a cup to be considered and to contribute to the meal pattern. So here's a graphic or a table of the different amounts for each grade group. You'll notice throughout that K through 5, 6 through 8 grades, and K8 pretty much follow the same amount of servings for each category. 9 through 12 is really where we see the increase amount and the differential between K5, 6, 8, or K8 gets quite a little bit larger. So as an example for fruit, you have weekly and then dailies in parentheses. So how you read this is, if I was a K5, 6, 8, or K8 school, I would need to serve 2.5 cups of fruit over the course of a week. Daily, I need to serve a minimum of 1/2 cup. For 9 through 12, I would need to have at least 5 cups over the course of the week, with a minimum of 1 cup per day. Moving on to vegetables. They may offer vegetables fresh, frozen, canned, or in juice form. Leafy greens credit as half the volume served. An example of this would be 1 cup of romaine lettuce would credit as 1/2 cup vegetable. No more than half of the vegetable offerings can be juice. And same as fruit, the minimum serving size to contribute toward the meal pattern is 1/8 cup. This is where it gets a little bit different from fruit. They do need to have what they call subgroup requirements each week. And the intent behind this was to provide a variety of different vegetables to school-aged children, and to provide some more differential or exposure to different types of vegetables that they may not see on their house or their daily basis. So this is over a 1-week period that they need to have this variety. They need to offer a dark green type of vegetable, which could be broccoli as an example, or romaine. A red-orange vegetable, which could fall as tomatoes or carrots or sweet potatoes. Beans and peas, so legumes or kidney beans. We all know that beans do offer a fair amount of protein, so these items can also be considered part of a meat alternate, but they can't count as both a vegetable and a meat alternate. So a menu planner planning a meal, if they chose to serve a bean burrito, they would have to determine, are the beans in the burrito going to count as their beans and peas for their vegetable requirement, or will the beans within the burrito contribute towards the meat alternate for the day? They can't be counted as both. There's also a starchy option or starchy subgroup, which is corn, green peas, and potatoes. And then there's a large other category, which I'll show in just a moment. There's a lot of different fruit or vegetables that fall in this category. So here's your table for your vegetable amounts. Okay, so the K through 8, they have to offer 3 3/4 cups over the course of a week, 3/4 of a cup daily. And then at the high school level, 5 cups over the course of the week with 1 cup a day minimum. And then it shows you your weekly amounts required for each of those subgroups. And again, they're weekly amounts. So a menu planner could plan different vegetables each day in order to meet these requirements for each subgroup. As mentioned, here are some other examples of the different subgroups and what specific vegetables would fall under each subgroup. You'll notice the other category is your largest, and if you probably can't think about a certain vegetable and it doesn't necessarily fall into a certain color category that you can think of or starchy, it probably falls into other. Moving on to grains. In the meal pattern, 80% of the grains offered must be whole grain rich. And what this means is that the whole grain rich food must contain at least 50% whole grains. And no more than 2 ounce equivalent per week of grain-based desserts may be counted towards the meal pattern. And schools must offer a minimum daily and weekly serving ranges for grains for lunch. So here's the meal pattern here, and you'll notice it does get a little different between K through 6 and the subsequent grade groups. 9 through 12, of course, is still your largest, where your weekly daily amounts, you have 8 to 9 ounce equivalents for K6, with 1 ounce as a requirement at minimum per day. Moving on to meat or meat alternates, there are a number of options here that a menu planner could select from, including beef, chicken, pork, cheese, egg, yogurts, bean, tofu, and nut or nut butters. This also varies from grade group to grade group. On average, it's around 8 to 10 ounce equivalents per week, with a minimum of 1 ounce equivalent offered each day. Of course, in the high school, you have 10 to 12 and 2 ounce of meat alternate ounce requirements each day. So you're probably wondering, how do you credit a meat or meat alternate? How do you know what a 1 ounce equivalent is? Well, you can look at the food buying guide. There is an active link here for you to access and to view on how fresh or unprocessed whole foods could be evaluated for ounce equivalents. But this table also gives you some examples of what would be considered an ounce equivalent. So an ounce of fresh or frozen meat, poultry or fish, an ounce of tofu, 2 tablespoons of peanut butter would be an ounce. 1 large egg is considered a 2 ounce equivalent. 1 ounce of cheese, 1/4 cup of shredded cheese, 1/4 cup of cooked beans, or a 1/2 cup of yogurt, all are considered 1 ounce equivalents. There are some other things to consider when crediting meat or meat alternates. So we need to look at just the meat that's contributing to the meal pattern by the weight of the credible meat alternate in the product. And as you're probably familiar, a lot of our processed meat products are not pure meat. They do contain other additives, stabilizers, and water, such as the example on the screen. So how would one determine how many ounce equivalents this item would be, knowing that there are some fillers or additional water added? Well, that's where the child nutrition label comes into play. This was developed in 1984 to help schools determine the contribution that a commercial product makes towards the meal pattern. It provides the schools, along with state agencies, a warranty or guarantee that the product contributes to the meal pattern as printed on the label. This is a voluntary program for manufacturers, but it is beneficial for them to participate in, particularly if one of their main consumers are schools. It's also voluntary for schools to find and keep record of these labels, but it is to their benefit to do so, particularly when they are being reviewed for compliance for the meal pattern. So let's talk about how you credit a grain. Well, grains are contributed to the meal pattern by the weight of the credible grain in the item. And there are 4 different ways you can go about this. First is calculating the ounce equivalent per serving based on the weight of the credible grain in the item. This is most likely done if you're making something from scratch in your large kitchen. You would utilize the recipe that you have. And there are a series of steps and tutorials that USDA provides on how to do this with a scratch-based item. You can also look at the USDA Food Buying Guide, Exhibit A, which we'll take a look at here in just a moment. That also helps you with determining the amount of crediting of grains. You can look at a product formulation statement, which is similar to a child nutrition label that we just looked at. Or if in combination with a meat and meat alternate, the grain should also be listed on that CN label. CN labels are only available for meat alternate products, not solely just grain. But if grain happens to be a part of that meat alternate item, so think of like a chicken nugget that's breaded, you would see the grain being credited or the ounce amount provided on that CN label. So let's look at Exhibit A, crediting grains. In the shadow here, you can see an example of what it looks like. We'll open up Exhibit A itself. Here's Exhibit A. The Food Buying Guide is available in all different sections on the USDA website, and I do have links for you at the end of this presentation for reference. So in Chapter 4 of the Food Buying Guide, it covers grains. I am going to scroll down to show you Exhibit A. But this buying guide shows you all sorts of information, provides definitions of different types of grains, examples of grains that are credible, breakfast cereals, and pastas, and the like, criteria used to determine acceptable grain items, different blends. Does my product meet whole grain rich criteria? Provides you a flow chart here to figure that out if you were a menu planner. And then this does explain how to read Exhibit A, which I'm going to go over here in just a moment, how you actually figure that out. This was the worksheet that I was referring to previously. If you have a recipe that you're trying to determine the amount of grains, this allows you to go through those steps to determine. So here's Exhibit A. We're just going to go through the first part of it here. But it shows you these different groupings of different types of grain items that you could be serving. So say I have an English muffin sandwich that I serve in the morning. So I would look for English muffin, and I find that it's in Group B here. At this point, you would want to read your food label and determine how many grams each of those English muffins are or contain. So if that English muffin weighed 28 grams or 1 ounce, you could consider that English muffin as a 1 ounce equivalent. If that English muffin was smaller, 14 grams or 7 grams, I can't imagine an English muffin of 7 grams, but you know, depending on what it is, it shows you essentially the ounce equivalents here. Okay. The minimum serving size would be 25 grams or 0.9 ounce for if you want to consider that 1 serving. Okay. We'll scroll down. You'll notice there's additional groups. So if you wanted to provide a cereal bar or a donut or a sweet roll, remember you can do this, but it is limited during the week. It would also show you there the amount of the weight of the product and then what it would equate as far as ounce equivalents. So this is a very handy chart to use for meal planners to determine the weight of the product meets certain ounce equivalents. And again, you would need the nutrition fact information in order to determine this, to get that weight of the product. Here's another example on how to do it. It's a nice infograph on how to read it. Again, it's another example of an English muffin. find the group on the chart, identify how many ounce equivalents for 1 ounce equivalent. So we looked at that already. And number 3, divide your product weight in grams by the amount of grams that equal 1 ounce. So in this example, their muffin weighed 57 grams. So they divided 57 grams by that 1 ounce equivalent of 28. And they found that it equaled 2.03 ounce equivalents. And in these cases, you want to round down. You can't round up. You can't give it more credit than the actual grain equivalent that it equals. So in this instance, we have 2.03. It's going to round down to 2 ounces. As mentioned previously, another way you can credit grain is a product formulation statement. So this is an example of what one would look like. This would come from a manufacturer to essentially provide the menu planner information on the product formulation of the product and its grain contribution. So schools would locate these or request these from manufacturer and then keep them on file for validation that the product that they're providing to their students meets requirements. The last meal pattern requirement is fluid milk. So your allowable milk options include fat-free, low-fat, or fat-free, low-fat, lactose-reduced. And each of those fat levels can be unflavored or flavored. Schools must offer at least 2 choices daily, and one of the choices must be unflavored. So they can't serve chocolate milk and strawberry milk only. They'd have to serve white milk with a chocolate milk or white milk with a strawberry milk. But they couldn't serve 2 different flavored milks for their choices. Again, here is the meal pattern requirement. It's essentially one for everybody. They need to serve 1 cup minimum daily with 5 cups over the course of the week. So essentially that's 1 cup every day with meal. And as mentioned, here are your different websites for different resources. If you're looking for more information about child nutrition programs, how they are implemented in different schools, along with meal pattern, and then the food buying guide that the entire food buying guide, as we had gone through just the grain section, you can explore and look at the different sections within the buying guide for more information.